give till it hurts. This is a phrase that we hear a lot in many circles of how much should I give? Should I give a little? Should I give a lot? And people say, well, give until it hurts. Now, I'm going to make an analogy about finances that we're going to apply to reconciliation, to grace, to mercy. And I want to challenge that notion that giving till it hurts is actually the biblical way to see your pain versus a problem versus how you're choosing to engage and help with that problem. And this is coming out of Galatians 6, 1-5. He says, brothers, if anyone is caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch for yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something, when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. For each will have to bear his own load. And so Paul is giving an instruction with actually a very hopeful promise. If you think back through the Old Testament law, there was more than 600 commandments that they tried to apprehend, that they tried to practice. And as time went on, in order to make sure that they didn't break those commands, the teachers of the law would add even more commands, which weren't actually biblical commands, but they were designed to kind of put a fence around the law, if you will, to keep you from falling over the edge. So if you don't get to the fence, you can't fall off the edge, right? And this is such a burden, and yet the law of Christ is easily fulfilled. I say easily, and maybe we should say easily, put it in air quotes, by bearing one another's burdens. And so Tim Keller, he wrote a fantastic book called Ministries of Mercy. This is the When Helping Hurts book, but a generation earlier, essentially. And it has some fantastic advice on how to use your money, how to give money, when to know when you're hurting and not helping. And so, but one of his metrics is this whole dealing with this question of giving till it hurts. Is this biblical? And he also says no. He says we should give until their burden becomes our burden. And so giving till it hurts means basically I have a certain percent of margin in my life. So here's what I make. Here's what I have extra that I don't need. And then here's my pain point. And so I can give right here. But I'm going to stop before it gets to the painful level because I still need to maintain me. I need to take care of me. And that's the attitude behind give till it hurts, is I'm going to give up until the point that I can't bear it or till it becomes my problem. But that's not actually biblical. Right here he says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Essentially, in bearing one another's burdens, when your burden becomes a burden to me, now we are at the right point. Now, we've been talking about money, but let's talk about social problems. Let's talk about a lack of justice. Let's talk about weeping with those who weep. In our world, or in the Western world, where individualism is kind of the reigning paradigm, it's very difficult to think of the other person and how this impacts me. You hear people say a lot of times, well, hey, that's your problem, not my problem. We have statements like, hey, you do you. To your own self be true. And these are different phrases that get to this idea of individualism. And that idea is that I'm responsible for me and you're responsible for you. And it's inappropriate for me to take my problems and put them onto you and vice versa. And so this, again, is not actually a biblical model. This is particularly problematic in a city like Houston, in a neighborhood like ours, where we have people from so many cultures where they are not raised in individualism. They're raised in some kind of collectivism. When your neighbor has a problem, the neighbors should help out that neighbor until that problem is gone. It's not his problem alone. And some of this is based around our history. You know, people crossed the ocean in boats and went westward across the plains by themselves and had to be self-sufficient, had to be jack of all trades. And this is kind of what has shaped the American narrative. But this is not a global norm, as I was taught. I was taught by my father to be able to do a little bit of everything, you know, to work on the sink and work on the car. And then when I went to the Middle East, I learned that's not how they operate. They don't You don't carry your own groceries. You give someone a small tip, but you tip someone to do that. You don't wash your own car. You give someone a small tip to do that. You don't fix your own sink. You pay someone to do that for you. And so for them, it's all about being connected to the right person so that when you have a problem, people can surround you and can help you out. There's a very, very famous story from Egypt where a shop owner was ready to retire, didn't have a son, and so he was selling his store. And essentially there was a very greedy businessman who was buying his store, and there was an error in the final documentation wherein there was a misplaced decimal. And so he accidentally sold his store at a fraction of what the business was worth. Now, when we think stores in the West, we think you have products and goods or services, I have money, I come, I buy it, end of transaction, I go my way, you go your way, we're all happy. But this is not the case at all. In the Middle East, stores have their own customer base that are their customers. Even if they sell the same thing as next door, you go to that person, not to the guy next door. You don't shop around for prices. You go to your guy, and he is expected to do for you what you need done. He's expected to have a good price for you and to have what you need. And if he sells it to someone else at a reduced price, he can't serve his own customers. So this is a problem for him. Oftentimes, though, businesses become an essential part of the community where they provide services to people when they need jobs. And so that's what this store was. Whenever someone didn't have the money to pay for groceries, but he knew them, he says, look, you can pay next time what you owe me this time. And so he lets them take the groceries so they don't go hungry, and then next time they come, they pay him for it. When someone's getting married and their kid needs a job to earn some money for the wedding and for what was needed for the wedding, he allowed them to have a job and to work some hours at the store. And so he has been an integral part of the society. And so when this error happened, the businessman gives him the reduced payment, and he's done. Well, the man immediately wants to buy back his store, but he doesn't have the means to buy back the store. Guess what the community does? The community rises up together, and they repay their debts to this man. They give him money. They give him money to buy back his own store. And their logic is, here's a man that we know and we trust, who has dealt honestly and justly with us, who has been gracious and merciful to us for a generation. Here's a man who's willing to exploit someone with a misplaced decimal and has no moral value whatsoever. He's going to mistreat us for the next generation. And so in my world, we let businesses die. There's no loyalty to a business. If a business goes under, we kind of write it off as well. You know, they should have had better management or whatever. Tough for them. But in this area of the world, this community rose up, brought in enough money where this man was able to buy back his store. His burden became their burden, but their burden had also become his burden. And so as we think through people who are hurting right now, it's very easy to think historically and go, well, I'm not from this time period that perpetuated this problem. Whatever the problem is, there's a number of racial problems in our country. Or to go, well, I'm not from this ethnic vein that perpetuated this problem. Or, hey, my people have been hurt as well. And all of these might be technically true responses in as far as they go, but they escape and they're a rationalization for us to get out of what the scriptures call us to, which is your pain. If I'm going to fulfill the law of Christ, I need to figure out, how do I make your pain my pain? And so that's what I want you to talk about today, is how do you look at the pain and suffering of others and create a space and a context wherein you can share in bearing that burden?